Good day. In this video, I'm going to share with you the 10 most common scenarios that will raise suspicion in job interviews. Okay, the first thing I'd like to share with you is when candidates cannot remember some details of some past achievement because the interviewer performs a deep dive. Okay, so basically the core reason why someone would do a deep dive with you would be to deep proof your expertise, right? So whereas if you cannot remember some rather key details from those events, maybe you did not own those, maybe it's as simple as you didn't prepare for the interview, or a combination of both, right? So you'd want to ensure that you remember as much as possible from those experiences, even if they happened a while back, right? So the fix would be to prepare by using some brain dumps, make a 3-page brain dump about your key experiences, key highlights, and of course, ideally end up with a story bank, right? But this would be the first scenario. The second scenario I'd like to share with you would be people have a tendency to fabricate successful outcomes. So when you think of the star answer, in the results, you would sell yourself, so to speak, on the results. Now, in my experience, those results oftentimes sound more positive than they actually were. I've seen numerous examples of candidates where the actual project was a flop, but they still, sold it as being a success. Or maybe that project isn't yet completed, so you don't have results to share with them. But in my experience, having an overly positive, successful outcome is likely to trigger suspicion in this job interview, so you'd better stay realistic about those events. And if the project did not conclude, you could be upfront about this, and you could speak about that specific part of this experience that would sell yourself on the key highlight, on the key ideas, key aptitudes and skills that you want to communicate, right? The third scenario I'd like to talk about here about suspicion is people have a tendency to exaggerate their problem-solving skills. Things such as you resolved a very difficult, you talk about resolving a very difficult problem, which in fact you were only part of. So you were a part of a team which resolved a very difficult problem. And the way candidates would hide this or would raise suspicion with this would overly using we did this versus I did this. Okay, so the fix would be quite obvious, like you don't want to take ownership of someone else's achievements, but try to focus on I did this. If you want to sell yourself on your problem-solving skills, with the obvious exception, if you want to sell yourself as a team player primarily, then you would still, focus on we did this, right? So it's a difference in the objective you have, but the I versus we topic is still of actuality here, right? The fourth scenario I'd like to talk about here is people inflating or making up metrics in job interviews. And usually candidates who speak well also have a tendency to inflate, to sell themselves in their metrics, and more often than not in their elevator pitch, in your tell me about yourself. What happens here in my experience, this is quite dangerous because candidates have become smarter and more critical, use a lot more critical thinking to deep proof your expertise. And the core danger here, if you introduce such a metric early on in the process and they're suspicious about it, they will deep proof you for the entirety of the interview. Okay, this happened, and this was the core reason why an otherwise good candidate did not manage to pass that final interview round. So my advice here would be, if you still want to use metrics that, to sell yourself early on in the process, if they become super suspicious about them, you can simply assume it and move on. In my experience, it's not a disqualifier if you just agree, hey, yes, it wasn't entirely that, I was responsible for the decision, but I was part of this decision which impacted, 10,000 customers. All right, so assume it and move on, because these are early on in the process. It's in your tell me about yourself, so it's not a disqualifier, right? The fifth scenario that might raise suspicion in job interviews is faking your weakness. The most common example is People tend to say public speaking is their weakness. Yes, this is a cliche weakness. It's used for 10 years or more, but in my experience, this is not such a big problem. Okay, because in my experience, most candidates cannot pitch that public speaking quite well. But still, if you want a fix, if you still want to use public speaking and be safe, try to have a backup weakness or another 2 or 3 weaknesses, because the idea is how you pitch those weaknesses at the end of the day, right? So if they don't like public speaking, be prepared to also use other ones. The sixth scenario that raises suspicion in job interviews is inventing or AI rewarded stories. So what happens here for me as an interview coach and selling interview trainings, it takes minutes to spot if someone rewarded their answers using AI. So basically if you sound genuine or not. Okay, so it's a matter of minutes for me as someone who does this extensively, and it's not a complicated deal for a skilled interviewer. Now, what's the fix here? If you embraced, so to speak, AI rewarded answers, well, to fix, my advice to you would be to employ a hard stop. To literally know what happens here is most candidates who have this problem only realize how bad their answers sound when actually interviewing. Okay, so you prepare your AI reward answers that you think they might sound amazing, and then during the interview you realize they don't. Okay, so what's the fix here? Well, if you delivered your AI reward answers and you feel like it's not good, and you feel like your interviewer isn't happy with what you're saying, then the fix would be to propose to give another story. Hey, I realize this story might not be the best. May I share another one with you? Okay, or if you realize it's not a great way to communicate this, after the first sentence, you could also employ a reset. Okay, let me just start over again. Let me just rephrase that in a better context, right? And you would use your own language. Okay, so it's still possible. Even if you raise suspicion because you rewarded your stories with AI, you could still switch, so to speak, to your real language in job interviews. Point number 7 of suspicious behavior in job interview would be around conflict resolution. Okay, tell me about the time when you did not get along with your manager, for instance, right? So basically there's 2 scenarios here. First scenario is that you want to, you genuinely want to communicate the conflict, but the problem is that you sound a bit negative and critical of your past employers, which is a dangerous thing, because many candidates don't get along with their previous employers as being the core reason for which they want to move on. Right? This is not something you would want to talk in a job interview, right? So the fix here for this scenario would be to practice delivery, to practice beforehand and try to see how you sound. Ensure you communicate in a positive way, even though that experience might not have been super positive. Or I've also seen instances where people could not get over some very tense moments in the previous role. So this scenario would advise you to find another example of conflict, right? And the second scenario of conflict resolution that raises suspicion is when people simply fake their examples about having a conflict with the manager or not getting along with a colleague for the simple reason they don't have interpersonal skills. So for instance, if you worked all your life as a freelancer or even remotely, it's less likely you're good with these things, right? So my advice would still be on the truthful side. Okay, the 8th, I would say this is the most common reason of suspicion, but it's not primarily during job interviews, and that is your CV. So most CVs do not contain inaccuracies, to put it mildly. Could be about employment dates and gaps, could be about job title and responsibilities, could be about education, could be remote or on-site work, and it's generally a combination of all of these, right? So I won't insist, but the CV is also a contentious point here. Number 9, your commitment to the role that you're applying for. Why do you want to work for this company? So there's many scenarios. For example, you as an overqualified candidate just simply want to land a job with FANGs and then you'll see. There's many scenarios which do not really fit into employers' interests, and this is why might want to prepare that your motivation to join the company beyond, just over complimenting them. Right, so there's many candidates. Maybe you simply need a job, and you think like, hey, maybe I could get into a FANG. You could be as good as that, but you must have a bit more motivation to show for the job, and be prepared to handle a bit more drama on your motivation to join this company, especially these days, right? And the 10th topic I'd like to share with you here that raises suspicion is abnormal answer length in job interviews. So it's either too short, when your answers are short, robotic. Okay, why would this trigger the alarm for a skill interviewer? Well, in job interviews, most candidates are superficially prepared, and superficially prepared candidates will almost always give superficial answers, right? So this is why you would want to avoid too short answers, or robotic types of answers, or few-word answer. And the other extreme would be that other types of candidates would give long answers. They would bluff essentially, because you might be able to speak at length, even if you don't make sense, even if you lack clarity of thought. But if you're a motivational speaker, for instance, you could take advantage of that in job interviews. Whereas in my experience, motivational speaking doesn't correlate too well with high-performing individuals. Take Elon Musk. He doesn't speak well, but he's a genius. Okay, so long story short, you would want to work on finding the ideal length of your answer, keeping in mind that in my experience, longer convincing first answers, so long you make sense and score well on clarity of thought, tend to have the best outcomes, right? And let me just close by saying that the absolute best method I know to eliminate suspicion in job interviews, if your interviewer might be suspicious you achieved something or about one of your experiences, would be candidates who share their story banks with their interviewers before, during, or after, in the thank you notes if you want. Hey, I know you might have been skeptical about this. Hey, I'd like to share my story bank with you in full, and I'm ready to take any questions. I'm ready to clarify anything from there, even do reference checks on those elements, right? So I hope you found this useful, and thank you very much for watching.